Today I am going to break down how I made Evil Scarlet Witch animation from start to finish. Everything started with prototyping the scene. Using the basic Blender primitives, I began blocking out the environment. For Scarlet Witch, I used this export from 𝒚𝒐𝒎𝒆.com. Using the free 𝒚𝒐𝒎𝒆 add-on, I created a control rig for her and gave a starting pose. Then I made a simple geonode setup to scatter some cylinders around the scene to represent the candles. Added some cameras and started animating the scene. To visualize her powers, I used mesh circles and gave them track to constraint to make them always point towards the camera. Then did a viewport render animation. Now based on that prototype, I started building the final shapes. Grabbed some brick textures from the web, mostly from the textures.com, and started making the walls and floor. Since I initially thought to render this in Eevee, instead of using the displacement from shaders, I used the displacement modifier to give some displacement. Later, this also came in handy when I started scattering the candles. Instead of sticking to the flat shape, this way candles will stick to this displaced shape. Then I created pillars for the scene. And also added some ambient occlusion to every material to blend the object more into each other. Since these stairs get more focus in the scene, after texturing, I messed with its edges and took out some bricks just to give it a damaged look. And also placed some of those bricks around that area. For the candles, I found a few different free models from the web and gave them a wax material. To scatter them, I created a similar geonode setup. Initially, I used a 3D shape for the candles, but later changed it to a flat flame texture. After that, using the draw curve tool, I scattered the candles on the surface of the bricks. To create the evil magical book, first I created some pages in Photoshop using some dummy text and shapes. Using images as plain option, I imported them to Blender. Also created a cover for the book using a book cover texture. Then used a simple bone setup to create the book opening and closing animation. Actually, I started the project thinking I would use the procedural book that I created a little time ago, but turned out it wasn't quite ready to use in project yet. Then I mixed the book textures with a noise texture to create a glowing pattern and use it for the emission. To create our Scarlet Witch, I used Reallusion Character Creator 3 and gave her a little bit of American comic figure proportions, and also work on her materials a bit inside Character Creator. For her clothes, I went for a comic book look because it is simple to make, or maybe because it's more online content friendly. You pick the reason. So I created this torso piece and her socks and her tiara. I don't know what their actual names are. Then I UV unwrapped them and imported them to CC3 to do an automatic weight paint job. Then exported them back to Blender. Using the Auto Rig Pro Quick Rig, I created a control ring for the character, deleted some unnecessary hidden parts of her body, then added a child of constraint to her tiara and made it follow head movement. For the materials, I used a fabric texture to create variations in color, roughness, and buff. Also created a new texture and texture painted these lines to add more variations to her clothes. Instead of using gloves for her hands, here I decided to add emissive lines to her hand. But halfway through it, I realized I didn't like the result, so I used a simple gradient for it. I changed the colors of all textures to match them with each other. I mean, you don't want your walls, floors, and pillars to look like they are from different universes. I know the movie is about the multiverse, but that's not the point. I replaced the Xboard with Scarlet Witch and started the animating process. Here I replaced the flame object with a 2D flame card and gave it a subtle movement. For her cave, I created a cloth scene and applied it. Here I used higher stiffness values to get these results, especially the bending value. Add a solidify modifier for some thickness. Created two slightly different color materials for the outside and the inside of the cave. And since this is a fabric, I also added some translucency. For Scarlet Witch's hair, I initially thought to play with the new experimental feature in Blender, the new curve system. I could fake her hair simulation using geometry nodes and the technique I used in my Hulk transformation video, but I couldn't able to get some result like clumping hair and waves, so I had to go the other route, which I do not have much confidence in. I mean, I really suck at it. Hair grooming and especially hair simulation. For the hair grooming, I created two particle systems and created the left and right sides of her hair separately. Add some clumping and waves to her hair. Results are not great, but it's okay. For the hair material, I used the hair info node to create some variations. After a bit of animation, I rendered out a viewport animation to get some critiques for myself. To add subtle movements to the animation, I used my favorite tool inside Blender, graph modifiers. Using those, I add some noise to the basic movements of Scarlet Witch. Also, add a child of constraint to the cave to follow the movements of her upper spine bone, and more viewport renders to get more points to improve. I tried a few things to show her powers, like creating a volumetric ring to use with a 2D emissive circle, but later I gave up that whole volumetric thing. It didn't really look the way I wanted, and also to reduce extra render time. Since I'm a big fan of shallow focus, I kept the aperture of the camera to a lower number and also added a lot more candles. Since I used a 2D shape for flames, they're not going to look great from every angle. So I tweaked the geonode setup a little bit more to make the flames align with the camera. It wasn't perfect, but I didn't really worry about it because you can't really see any issues when they're out of focus. This first shot of the scene I rendered in Eevee. I tried to get good result in Eevee for the second shot, but then decided to switch to cycles and kept the volumetric light effect for the post-processing stage. To create the flame sucking animation, I created two empties in her hand and checked the location of the flame instances relative to those empties. Then mix the flame's location with those empties' location. When slider goes from 0 to 1, flames change their location, resulting in our flame sucking animation. Also, I animate the flames scale to go from their initial value to 0. For the facial animation, I used the shape keys that came with Character Creator. Then added some emissions to the pupils to give them a more evil look. I added a few more floating elements around Scarlet Witch and added some little details to the animation and tweaked everything until I was satisfied. For the lighting, I used one big area light from the top and used another area light to reduce the dark shadows on Scarlet Witch. Then, to make things easy in the compositing, I rendered the sequence in 3 view layers: background, foreground, and the Scarlet Witch. Then moved to After Effects for the final compositing. After importing the footage to After Effects using the fractal noise effect and free Video Copilot Saber plugin, I enhanced the look of her magic. Then I placed the first shot on top of her eye in the second shot. Animating the scale and the position of the footage, I matched it to the second shot and masked out the footage to be visible only on her pupil. Then did some time remapping to match the speed of the two shots. Apart from glow and enhancing her magical effects, I added a volumetric light effect to the scene using radial blur effect. Same time, using the turbulent displacement, I added some displacement to the footage around her magics. Then added some lens flares, more glow, and a little bit of grain. Using RGB curves, I did some grading to the footage as well. Well, it was okay. There was this glitch in the candles which I didn't even catch until everything was done. I tried my best to get a good hair simulation for the second part of the sequence but couldn't. So I tried creating her hair in different stages, converted them to mesh. Then using geometry nodes, I morphed between those stages and added some extra movements on top of that. Result wasn't smooth, but I was already past the deadline for the project. So this means I either need to work on my hair simulation skills or just give my characters bald head in the future. And that was the start to finish process on how I created the Evil Scarlet Witch animation. If you like to see how I did this Spider-Man scene, check my previous video. So I hope you learned something cool, something useful. I mean, that's what we like to do. We not only create stuff, we let you create with us. Hit the like button, comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to HellFX Learn so you won't miss out when the next video drops. So until next time,